at the board self-assessment.
Yes.
And there are some sticky notes in front of each of you.
Okay.
And if you could look through those just while you're eating and identify 5 of them, which you think indicate the 5 areas of desired board growth. So if there's an area where you'd like to really see the board grow in the next year or so, which are they? So, and I'll tell you how to write them down. So I just flip this page over just by happenstance. So across the top it'll say standard 2. So it would be standard 2, benchmark B. Benchmark B, yeah. So it would be S to B, okay? That's how you can list them. And if you want to list the page number, that can be helpful too, if you have page numbers.
Okay.
Great, and otherwise, let's do that for 10 minutes or so while you eat some lunch and look those
What
over.
are our page numbers on our version? There are not page numbers.
Well, then we'll just stick with that.
That'll work. Let's identify. I know, it's
Okay. I was trying to say thank you.
such a handy thing you don't remember anymore because then lunch is a surprise. Oh, that's exciting.
Has anybody heard from Kimberly? I have not.
I have not.
I emailed this morning, so.
That's okay, I got it. We're good.
Did you drive over this morning?
I did. Nice easy drive this morning.
Oh, good.
Yeah, no problem.
Smoky or still smoky?
No, we're cleared out.
Good.
Wind's cleared it out. Yep, it was a beautiful weekend over there.
Oh, nice.
Oh, well, except not for the people who were trying to go boating on the river. It's windy.
Oh, is it?
And cool, but I enjoyed it. I'm done with 100-degree weather for this year.
My husband described boating in Columbia River in 110 degrees. I think it was. Standing in front of the boat ramp.
It is, yeah, but the river's nice and cool, so
Yeah, that's really
that's the one advantage. It's a good place to be inside of the den. You have to be someplace outside. Kimberly.
How are you?
Good, thank you.
Good.
She started us on homework already.
Yeah, I put you right to work, I'm sorry.
No, that's great.
While you're eating your lunch, everyone is looking through the self-assessment that you completed and that we looked at a little bit last time, and identifying 5 areas in particular that you'd like to see some board growth in the next year or so. And that will help us look at what our goals are going to be. I don't know if there needs to be a formal opening of business. I just sort of launched into it, sorry.
I thought.
Excuse me. Thank you. Okay, the way I'm having you write them down is there's a right here. So, for example, this one would be standard 1, so PS1 benchmark. Okay, okay, yes, I can write this. That's standard.
department standard.
Right, standard check,
And
and that,
that which down here.
yes, so standard 1 is here, and then it has each of the benchmarks, you know, standard A, standard B, standard C, and eventually. And you can just write them all in the same sticky
Thank
note.
you.
Thank you.
So just the benchmark under it, not the specific question, like standard 3, benchmark 3.
You know, if you have a specific question.
Well, there's questions.
Right, you can certainly do that.
Okay.
Yeah, so you then just write Q4 or whatever it is.
Okay.
You can be as specific as you like. What we're going to do is we're going to see where there is commonality among the 4 of you. And Larry, you're writing some down too, right? So, yeah, great. Love to have that input as well. See where there's commonality and then talk through those a little bit.
It's supposed to get nicer.
Okay.
Looks still in the ceiling, so.
Okay.
It's supposed to get nicer.
Are you done yet?
I am done.
Okay. So why don't you let me know what yours are?
So I have two of them where like Kimberly, I called out the question also. So
That's fine.
under standard one, I had benchmark D,
Okay,
and I had a question for that one.
all right,
Question number 14.
okay,
And then also under one, I had benchmark E and F.
okay.
And then under standard 4,
Mhm.
I had benchmark C, question 62. And standard 5, benchmark A.
Thank you.
We're supposed to go to the question.
If you want. Yeah, you can go to the, because on some of them, they're very different under the
Yeah.
same benchmark. They have really different results. Some are very similar. Is anyone else done? Just let me know when you are.
What's your last one?
Standard 5, benchmark A.
A.
It was hard not to be influenced by the municipal week report that we had
No.
on the agenda for
I
tonight
know,
too.
yeah,
What to
that's,
say.
that's really
Yeah.
a component of the conversation, I thought as well.
It's interesting how your framework changes as
Right.
the weeks go on and the topics of conversation change.
Spend some time on it.
Mhm. You ready? Okay.
Standard 1, benchmark B. And standard 2, benchmark B, have similar, question 6 and 27 have similar themes.
Question 6. Question 7. Okay.
6 and 27.
Oh, don't worry.
You saw me going through and crossing things out, yeah, so it was like.
It's hard to narrow them down.
Yeah.
Standard 1, benchmark F.
Okay.
Question 22.
Question 23 on F.
22.
Okay.
Standard 3, benchmark E. Standard 4, benchmark A. And standard 4, benchmark C, question 62. Question 55 on the standard 4.
Thank you.
That's good. We don't have anything,
Anyone else done? You ready, Sandy?
I'm just trying to do.
Okay, that's fine. If you're not,
No, no, no,
I don't want to
that's
rush you.
okay.
Give you time for this.
So, I don't want to repeat here, so standard.
No, I do want you to repeat.
Okay, standard
So
one.
if you, please don't change your answers based on this.
Oh, no cheating. All right.
Because we want to see where the commonality is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, standard 1, benchmark E, number 18.
Okay.
And then I'm another 55. I thought I heard 55. Oh, there's standard.
Which,
Standard 4,
Standard 4, benchmark A.
benchmark A.
now I had question 35. Was that right, Jen?
No, I said 55.
55, excuse me. So I'm going to clarify that.
Totally not, sorry.
Okay, good. And you're seconding that?
And second,
Okay.
and then actually the next one, benchmark, standard 4, benchmark C, number 62. I'm seconding that one.
Okay.
30.
Okay. Mhm.
Right. I don't, now I've lost track of my page, but I'm on 3. Okay, and then standard 5, benchmark B, number 67.
D is in dog.
E is a boy.
B is in boy, and it was what question?
Number 67.
Thank you. Okay.
Oh, and then standard 5, benchmark D, number 72.
72. Okay.
So standard 1, benchmark D, and,
Is there a particular question?
yeah, well, I think all 3 of them apply,
Okay.
but the research, the question 13 is the one that, 13 and 14.
And 14, okay.
And 15, I think they all
Okay.
are relevant. Okay, I wrote, that we lack basing decisions on research.
Okay, what's your
And
next one?
that- and then standard two, so that was one of them.
Right.
And then standard
Gotcha.
two, benchmark B, and that is both questions 26 and 27.
Okay.
And then standard three, benchmark B. That was question 36 and 37. Again, that's a research-based one. And standard three, benchmark E, that has to do with the public, so public, but with the budget, sorry. Question 48 and question 50 in particular. And standard five, benchmark B, questions 67 and 68.
Okay, great. Thank you. Larry, how about you?
Standard 1A, and it's question 5. 1E,
1D.
E, I'm
E,
sorry.
okay.
Question 18.
Okay,
And 1F, questions 19 and 22.
all right.
And 2B, questions 26.
Okay, thank you.
Could have gone on. But
I'm sure you all could have gone. I know it's
Sure.
it's hard to narrow it down into 5 of them. And so now we're going to narrow these down into 5. And some of them are, this is helpful because it helps identify where all of you are on the same page in terms of looking at areas you would like to improve as a group. So, I mean, it's pretty obvious. This was three of them here, 3 here. And then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 that have 2 more. So I would probably,
Is there 3 on?
3 and
C?
4 and 4.
see, you're right. Okay, that's even better. So we have 6 that received at least 2 votes. I would suggest maybe we start off by taking the 3 of them that have 3 votes, and starting there. And if we have time, the other thing I'll do is I'll provide this to all of you so that if you as a group want to work on this afterwards, you'll have a listing of, identified which ones you as a group really decided you wanted to work on. So how does it work to dive into the standard one first? The other thing I should ask is looking at the agenda for all of you, do you have any questions about the agenda or anything that's missing or anything you want to make sure that we talk about today? It's a pretty broad agenda, but I just want to make sure that there isn't something on here or there's something missing.
You know, something that would be helpful for me if we have time, I
Okay.
put this at the bottom of the priority, but just to hear from your experience, since you get to work with so many school boards, just kind of what best practices you see. We've had some discussion as a board, with the election coming up, when's the best time to do goals, and how we were talking, we've worked on improving the superintendent evaluation
Sure.
system this year, so how can we build off of that?
Okay.
So I'm very curious about best practices.
Well, let me tell you just very briefly right now. I mean, in general, I think goal setting is helpful anytime. I think it really is great for new board members to come on board with some goals in place. Not to hold them to those, but to help them kind of understand where the district is heading for the next year, because they have a lot to learn. There's a lot to learn as a new board member. So if you have some goals in place, that's helpful. And then, I would suggest 6 months in or so, maybe January. Well, let's see, I guess they would be probably next summer, really, by the time they're on board in December. Then you sit down after they've had enough time to get their feet under them and talk about, okay, here are the goals that the previous board established. Moving forward, how do we want to look at them? And then give them that opportunity to be involved in the goal setting. Now, Kimberly.
So the ones that you put up there that have 3 or more, are those including Larry's?
Yes.
So I guess we're missing a board member, so that just seems like it's throwing it a little bit off because, you know, I'm not sure do you want to include, I'm not trying to disinclude you, Larry, I'm just saying if they're board
As the
goals,
board. That's a good question.
It, you know, because just one person creates it going a different direction. We're
Correct.
missing one person, so,
I guess the question would be, you know, do you want to make sure that these are just board goals without superintendent input into it, which is fine. You have the right to do that for sure, and it does change things when you get another person looking at them. That's a decision, I guess. I'd be happy to have the four of you talk about that a little bit. Whether that's
Well, are any of the ones that got 3, actually does 1F have 3 votes also? Am I seeing that correctly?
it does have 3.
So
I didn't count very well, did I?
maybe, you know, it just might be, it might be good to understand where,
Who the
if
three
any,
members
yeah.
Larry, did you get, I'm sorry, I just want to ask, did you get a chance to look through 4 or 5? Because almost all yours were in, I think, the first one. So did you see them mostly in that one and not as much in 4 and 5? Or did you have time to get through? I just didn't know, maybe you didn't have a chance to look through the rest of them. So you felt that your 5 were in just that kind of first and second category?
Yeah, I only did 4.
Oh, you only did
You
4.
put 4 of them up, not 5. Okay.
So mine, I mean, if you want to deduct mine out, which was fine, it was standard 1E, standard 1F.
1.
I don't know if there's a right way to do it, I'm just asking the question.
Right, and I don't know, I was just curious to see if it would
Standard
affect.
2B. And I was the only one in standard 1A, so.
Okay.
You were the one here. Yeah, okay.
But,
So then that gives us, there's one, I'm trying to see where the board, where we.
So then there's only one that got 3. That's a good question, really. So this is the only one that got 3 board member votes.
Was 4C, yeah. And I,
Yeah,
that's why I was wondering if it was
4C
only
question 62. So we should probably start with that one. The rest of them still, of course, all got 2. So, you know, what I would recommend is trying to.
But then there's a lot that have 2, so I think that balances a little bit to see where were we kind of seeing some of the same things, at least 2 of us.
Right.
Which isn't 3, so, I mean,
Right, yeah, it's more helpful with 5th board member to, you know, really get.
but I kind of feel like when we did it the other way, that only one of mine got in there. Maybe now when we look at 2, maybe it would be more balanced for, that I would see maybe 2 of mine on there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Because I only saw 1 of mine with the 3.
I think the intent was to start with the ones that got 3, but still discuss the ones that got 2 as
No, I
well. so
understand.
that we
Yeah.
I
Well-
understand, but I'm saying that focuses a little bit different than if we're looking at where the board each did.
And it is a board self-assessment, so these are scores that you gave yourself. Larry, you didn't participate in the self-assessment, did you? Yeah, most superintendents don't. You have the option of doing that, but then it's not as much of a self-assessment when you have someone who's not on the board. So, yeah, I think that was a really good question, Kimberly. So I think what that means to us is that we definitely need to start with this one first. So that's a good identification. So the last thing I was going to tell you sort of about best practices is when, you and I were talking about this a bit when everyone was walking in, is the superintendent evaluation, giving them the opportunity to see that rubric we board members to see the superintendent evaluation rubric is really helpful for them to kind of understand, oh, okay, that's what a superintendent is supposed to do. And you know, a really high level superintendent is operating here, and really, you know, there are a lot of veteran board members who take a look at that rubric for the first time and say, wow, it's nice to have that articulated that way. Yeah, it's lots of things that are difficult to articulate on our own as board members.
If I'm looking at that correctly, it looked like everybody got standard 2B, right? You've got the questions, 26 and 27, but those are both still related to
That's
standard.
true.
Oh, that is
Well, it
true.
might not have been everybody though, because,
No, it's 5, so all 4 of you plus me is 5.
Well, the other thing, we might
Actually, I
look
didn't think 2B.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Oh,
it could be
People made
repeats.
multiple questions.
Yeah,
It could
I got
be
it.
repeats,
I-
for sure. I mean, the other way to look at this is to count how many are in each standard. There are a lot of ways to do this.
I'm not trying to question it, I just wanted, it was difficult for me to see when we were adding another person in.
Right,
I wish you would throw it out.
I think it's a very legitimate question, and really what we want to do is just identify what are the areas where the board rated itself, fairly low on the scale, or those areas where there was a lot of disparity among.
And when you come to 4C, I completely can agree with this. I mean, this one, I see what they see in it, so I just didn't pick that one out, but I definitely want to say I'm on board with that.
Okay.
See, even though I'm not up there on that one.
Okay, that sounds good. So we'll probably start there, and then we can work through them a little bit and see how far we get on this today. Just so that you understand a little bit what our process is for the board goals, which goes until 2:30. We're going to work through these a little bit. And so we're on to number 2, which is what goals would help the board become more effective in these areas. And then we're going to talk a little bit about, number 3 is the difference between a district goal versus a board goal. What the difference is, I have your district goals. I downloaded your big overarching goals for the district as a whole, but I also have your short-term immediate goals for the coming year as a district. And we're going to look at what the board's role is in each of those, because sometimes it's hard to figure out, well, this is the district's goal, but as a board member, I don't really know where I fit in here. How can I fit in? And that can be frustrating if you feel like you don't have any opportunity to work towards those district goals. And then we'll do some agreement talk a little bit about putting up your list of what would be your board's goals based on those discussions. And then talk a little bit about, are there some things that you need as a board to help support you in reaching those goals? That's something I think that gets overlooked. There's lots of training for district staff, but there's not always a lot of information about what the board needs. So does that sound like a good plan for the next 2 hours? Okay, and if any of you need a break, let me know. If you just need to leave and use the restroom, just go ahead and do so. Just make yourself comfortable. So let's talk a little bit about C, question 62. So now I get to find it. I know you're probably all there already. Standard 4, C, question 62. Okay, so we're looking at regularly evaluate and adjust resources and strategies for closing achievement gaps to maximize their effectiveness. Correct? Is that the one that we're all looking at? So, okay, Amy, would you mind writing that up on the board here?
The question itself?
Yes, all right. Yes, the question itself. That would be great. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. So, one of the things I'd like you to think about is what are the ways that a board can regularly evaluate and adjust resources and strategies? What are the ways in which a board would do that?
Approving the budget.
Through budgeting? Okay.
It might not be too popular, but.
Well, yeah.
No, that's absolutely okay.
That's one way.
Okay.
I think it may be seen as us taking a micro look at it if we ask that resources be adjusted. It may be perceived that way because we're oftentimes involved not on the front end of deciding where those resources go, because that's not our role, right? That's not a criticism, that's just how it is.
I'm sorry, say that again. I didn't hear that.
Sorry, because I'm talking with the phone.
Well, and I'm writing.
So, as a board, we're not involved in making the budget on the front end,
Right.
which that's not our role. And
Mhm.
so that's, we delegate that obviously.
Sure.
But then when it comes back to when we get to see it, it's kind of awkward at that point to say, oh, you guys have worked now 4 months on the budget, move some of the resources over there, we don't think enough are allocated. And I don't know if that would be perceived as with what our responsibilities are as being okay to necessarily say that. Or not okay, but that would be maybe welcomed.
Okay.
Again, not as a criticism, just as that's the way that it's structured.
Right.
And so, I don't think that we've had that way of doing things.
Well, I think that's a fairly typical way for districts to do it. I mean, just as an example, I can speak about this because it's in the public. I mean, you look at the Vancouver board, And they were frustrated clearly with their process, or a couple of the board members were. And you can see where maybe some earlier conversations might have been more helpful in terms of helping them identify, you know, what budget needs would meet the board's needs. So when do you typically, how much time do you typically spend with your budget?
Not a lot.
Well, this year especially not.
Right, I know,
It's not
it's getting
ideal.
harder and harder.
Yeah.
As the legislature goes longer and longer. That's really a challenge, I think.
But we could have bigger conversation, I'm sorry, go ahead.
We do have several study sessions where we
Okay.
look at the budget, and then in response to conversation from those sessions, the district then goes and develops kind of a template of what additions or what changes they make to it. So it isn't like the board doesn't have any input in it, we do. It's obviously really challenging when the state legislature doesn't give us a
Yeah, it is
final
hard.
numbers until the end.
You know, so this is something that came up in our last discussion. That's actually the first thing to come up,
Okay,
the achievement opportunity gap, when we had our last discussion about this. And we were chatting also about the strategy side. As a board, we felt very strongly we could talk about trying to, because the consensus was we wanted to try and find new strategies to get at the issue, and that perhaps through doing research, going to, you know, digging up at any conference, any research we can find. Luckily, Kimberly has access to a bunch of online research that the, you know, typical citizen does not. You know, and so not just talk about the budgeting process, but the strategies, and perhaps that's easier for us to tackle first, is the very 30,000-foot strategy
okay.
discussion.
Which I see that one of the things you're doing in this upcoming year is looking at a new strategic plan, vision, mission. So might that be something you could address through your strategic plan? Would that be one way to look at how to regularly evaluate and adjust resources and strategies?
I think what drives this is that there remains a gap between
Mhm.
free use lunch
Mhm.
and regular ed students. And
And the history.
that's difficult for the board to see.
Mhm.
At the same time, the district is doing some things to get at that, and I guess I would differ with some of what I'm hearing, in that I don't see that as our job to fix that. I see that as our job to support the work that's being done and by applying resources that need to be applied. So I think that's a little bit different way to look at it.
Well, I think that came out through budgeting. I mean, you're providing the resources by the way that the board is budgeting. So I guess a question that I would have looking at those two is what kind of change would happen in the budgeting process that would help you feel like you had greater ability to regularly evaluate and adjust your resources to meet the needs for closing achievement gaps? What would work differently than the way it does now?
So I think we're going to hear different things, and I think that's okay. And I don't want to feel that I can't say that this is how I feel through the process, because I think you, Janet, are going to feel that we do it one way and that's the way, and I'm going to feel that we do it another way, and just being able to figure out how do we.
So just please don't qualify, just.
No, I don't want to
say,
qualify right
just-
now, that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is the time for all of you to just put different ideas out there. So yes, absolutely, Kimberly.
Yeah, and so I just want to feel free to say that I don't think that we have a voice in the budgeting process to the extent that, and again, I don't, any statement I make isn't saying that I think someone's doing something wrong at the district level. I think it's the nature of the way it's set up, it's the nature of the legislature. So it's not meant to be critical, it's meant to be like, how can we do it different? So I feel that, you know, maybe if we were on the front end and we said, here's, you know, the district has these priorities, here's our board goals, we want to try and align them as much as possible. Here's where we'd like to see more resources allocated.
Okay.
Like Amy said, maybe having some of the research that, because I think that's one thing I hit on benchmark B was the research. That's really what I was focusing on.
Okay.
That, or benchmark 1D, I was focusing that not having research or making decisions based on research, which kind of flows into this, is what you were saying.
Okay.
And then, of course, we're not going to make the decision at the micro level of where to put it, but if we can say, here is where, and then if the district comes back to us mid-process and says, here's where we've allocated money, the freedom to say, well, we feel that more needs to be spent on this and less on A, because this isn't reaching our goal.
Okay,
Now, does that mean it's gonna happen? It might or might not, but just being able to have that conversation.
okay. Do you get the budget in the early study sessions in a format that allows you to do that?
Well, usually in January, we do a 3-year budget projection, but that's really at a very, very 30,000.
Yeah, understood.
And that sort of presumes continuation of everything we're doing right
Okay.
now. It's just really trying to look at a longer term picture of are we going to be in balance or not.
Mhm.
And really comes from the time of when there were cuts in funding, and so trying to
Right.
see what the size of the gap is going to be.
It's such a
The coming
change,
year
isn't
and
it?
the
Yeah,
out year.
to where we are now.
It's very
It's,
different.
yeah.
It's very different.
I would say in more recent years, probably part of the last 2 years, as things have turned a little bit. I think the board does a really good job of regularly evaluating, and as I look at what that actual benchmark is, and it's where we
some
Yeah,
hold school
4C.
district accountable for meeting student learning
Yeah,
expectations
It's adopting
Yeah.
policies.
by measuring student academic progress.
Right, so, I
needs-based.
mean, I think from our performance measures reporting to the school improvement visits, I mean, I think the board gets a really great dose of student achievement data.
Okay.
That's valid and reliable assessments. We're looking at state assessments, we're looking at our own performance measures, I mean, we're generating data out of our own system. So I think there's a really fine job that's done there. And I think what, then our role as administration, or what we've tended to do perhaps more informally than we should, is as we have those conversations, we try and glean what's sort of important or what's resonating with the board, and then to the extent we can, try and incorporate those into the budget process. But it
Okay.
has been a challenge the last couple of years as the legislative sessions have gone so late. You can't really talk with a whole lot of specificity. And
Right.
so it's been a sort of, what are those things we're gonna be able to add into the budget have been very, we're talking about them at the cabinet level throughout the spring,
Mhm.
but it's a very fluid, ongoing list, and then we haven't done as good a job, I think, finding the right ways to engage the board in those kind of ongoing conversations, because we don't know what all the resources are going to be that we're going
Right.
to deal with.
You don't know what the resources are, but you all probably do know what your priorities are. And so I would suggest you start with the priorities, and then, if you have a sort of a wish list, which would be your list of priorities, and you have enough to fund number 1 and number 2, but not 4 or 5, 3, 4, 5, maybe that would be a way to approach it. So it sounds like when the administrators are putting together the budgeting, maybe you all need a better idea of what the board's priorities. I'm throwing that out there.
More
Is that
quantified,
true?
yeah.
More quantified?
Yeah, I'm thinking of things that we've done in the past. In the first year where it looked like we were not cutting, and we did do, and it was prior to you and Amy coming on, that we had the sheets all around the room and the dots, and we as a board went around and put dots on what we felt, not specific things, but just kind of general areas.
What the priorities are
Yes.
for maintaining funding? at that
For
point?
if we had the opportunity to increase
To
funding,
increase, okay.
where were the areas that we wanted to
Okay.
see funding go? But the other is when I first came on and we were doing budget cuts, we got pages of, here are what things cost, what would you cut, which was way no fun. But we could do something similar where we prioritize that way. Here's what a staff member costs, here's what a program costs, here's what, and do something along those lines where that we could.
Was that helpful or was that overwhelming?
Well, you hated cutting, I mean, that was
Right.
what was awful.
Yeah, we're in a more fun environment.
Right, that was where
It's not
you're
all
like,
fun,
"Oh,
but I
I
mean,
wanna
yeah,
cut
part of
this
it's more
program,
fun.
or I don't
Yeah.
wanna cut this for it, or whatever,
Mhm.
but having a dollar amount was really helpful to
Okay.
visualize, and how many kids it impacted,
Mhm.
the information that we got, and that was enormously helpful, ways we could say, okay, how much are we spending?
How would you summarize that so that we can capture that thought?
A spreadsheet,
Quantifiable.
yeah, with quantifiable lists of potential ways.
Kind of like remodeling of your house.
Yeah.
I mean, but sure,
Yeah,
this is
yeah,
what it
yeah,
costs
right,
here, this is
exactly,
what it
yeah.
costs here, here's my priority.
Here's what hardwood costs, here's what
Right.
linoleum costs.
I've just been going through that.
Okay.
You know, I'm thinking of it in that way, because we had to make certain decisions over this decision, or,
Right.
of course, we're dealing with people's lives, so I don't want to equate that.
No, I understand what you're
It's
saying.
really, you know, okay, how many kids participate in this sport, or how many kids are involved in this program,
How many
and
kids
how
are
much,
touched.
yeah, how many kids are touched, and you didn't want to, again, get it that focused, but it was helpful to visualize.
So
a
if-
lot of the challenge, I think, is there's so many things that are external to us that are demands. I mean, we have to increase the number of teaching staff because we have more students. There are a lot of things that are set in stone that we don't have a lot of flexibility over. But I think what I'm hearing Sandy say, and what I've heard the board articulate in the past, is that we appreciate that staff takes the information from our study sessions and gleans what they do and translates it into a document that gives us, is pretty reflective of what we have expressed, but we want to be part of the conversation earlier. And I think that's what I've heard articulated.
Well, I also think it's frustrating for staff for us to come back in and say, once Larry or Lydia's put together the budget, and we come back and say, I don't want to say, I mean, it's hard at that point to say,
Right,
and they've already worked
Right.
months on it,
right.
right?
And then you feel like you're being critical.
Yeah, that becomes an awkward
Yes.
conversation where if we have it up front, and I love that idea, Sandy. I love that. That makes it real.
Right, well, and it's nice when it's paper, because then you're not saying either to a staff member or another board member, I want this
This, yeah.
more, right,
Yeah.
than what you're saying, because then
Yeah.
it sounds like, I don't want what you're saying, but that's not what it, you know, that, and that's this is a little more neutral environment.
And the dot exercise was really
And that's
such a great exercise in forcing us, like with remodeling,
Yeah.
to make choices
Yeah.
based on what we envision priorities.
Right.
And you know what, I've heard you guys mention that several times now. I've heard you
Yeah.
guys talk about this being a really effective exercise.
Okay.
So, I mean, this has come up several times.
So you need to do that again.
I've heard about
Yes.
this, and it sounds like everybody really appreciated it.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like to me too. And it seems like that's a really good way for you to get your voice into the process early. And the other thing about it is that when you're putting your dots around, it also is a little less personal, and it's a little bit more about the whole boards.
Right.
Sort of like what we did there, where we kind of look at, the overall, commonality of board needs or board desires.
Yeah, both of them have the advantage of it not being as, this is this person's issue or agenda. And you had limited resources, right? If it was the spreadsheet, you had, here's the X number of dollars that you have to play with, or you have X number of dots. So it again forced that thinking about, it's not,
And administrators and principals, I think, did the same thing.
Yes.
right?
yeah.
So Larry, you had mentioned that you and Lydia were speaking about getting the board together in February to think about doing, I think, a process similar to this. Was that February timeframe helpful to have this kind of high-level discussion? Is that a good time? Thinking that the legislature is going to stay on schedule. Well,
Let's
not a budget year. Who knows?
Stay on not being on schedule, is that what you meant?
No, but in an ideal, in a typical year, is February a good time? Is that helpful?
From a budget development standpoint, it's a good time.
Okay.
So is that when it would be helpful to do, for the board and your administrators to do this? Have that spreadsheet, the quantifiable list of costs, program staff, and then do the dot exercise where they identify priorities?
That's where
If you can be.
Or is that too late?
You were too early, I think,
Oh.
because we don't have numbers.
Actually,
But
well,
if we have priorities, then we see what.
Right.
you don't need numbers for
For
this.
sure.
Yeah, you don't need-
Maybe that comes first.
I think that would be earlier.
That's first. Like what, January? February? And that's,
Yeah, I would put it in that December, January timeframe, somewhere in there.
This is- Something else I think really plays into this is when we had the discussion about who to get as our diversity equity person or group, we basically made our decision based on cost. So when we found out that Claudette was going to be $14,000 or whatever, 11 or whatever it was, I mean, I think that helped us all to have commonality because I really wanted Claudette, right? you know, other people wanted, and then some people didn't really care one way or the other, but when we put the costs out there and we could see it more at that level, we all kind of were able to say, okay, we don't want to spend $14,000 on.
Right, well, and I think to clarify, that was the only difference, was the cost. They were equally good.
Right.
So, yeah, and that is really helpful, right?
Yeah, it totally helped us to like have more evidence, I guess, of why we would make one decision over the other.
Right.
And like you're saying, not just cost, but how many students.
Right.
Does it-
Right, the benefit,
Yeah.
yeah.
So it's both your priority as well as the associated cost with that priority to help you all make, I mean, that makes lots of sense. Again, if you compare it
Cost
to
benefit.
building a house or remodeling a house, you don't make decisions without looking at the cost. You may have a priority, but if the cost doesn't match with what the benefit is, then you're gonna make different decisions there. So if we're looking at this in January, February, what's realistic here on the spreadsheet? Which is kind of that quantifiable list of costs.
Well, I mean, we know, the dollar figure we use all in for a certificated staff member is $100,000. I mean, that's just kind of the placeholder for salary.
Standard,
Yeah, I mean,
okay.
there are, rough costs like that you can look at. I think one of the frustrations for board members, and certainly a frustration for administration as well, is you oftentimes don't have as much flexibility as you think you have within a budget. There are, I would take any one of a number of things from unfunded COLA cost and unfunded pension cost to surface water management. I mean, all these sort of unglamorous things that pretty soon, $15 million
Well, and that's how this worked
goes pretty quickly.
many years ago, was that here is where we have control,
Right.
and here's what we need to cut. So I'm envisioning here's what we have control over dollar-wise, and here's what you can do with that amount of dollars, approximately, because obviously we want to know exactly what our dollars are.
So understanding what's
Yeah,
flexible and what isn't.
Absolutely, I think that's really helpful for us
Yeah.
as
Yeah,
well,
for sure.
to see what are the flexible dollars.
I mentioned before that the best exercise that I ever went through was doing that with the federal education budget. And there really are not very many dollars, and the choices are all bad, so, it's really identifying what we have control over. is
Okay.
really a great-
And would that be part of the spreadsheet? Would you see that as part of looking at the spreadsheet and identifying there which
Because
items are flexible and which aren't?
later
That
in the
makes
year,
sense.
we're gonna have a better sense of what the legislature is adding to our plate.
Yeah, right.
If
Requirements.
Okay, all now all of a sudden we're gonna have to do all the kindergarten next year, and then that changes what our flexible options are.
It's also, important to have an operational definition of what's flexible and what's not. I
Okay.
mean, I would use as an example something like highly capable. We have to have highly capable. We don't have to do highly capable the way we do it. I mean, if we want to do it a much less expensive model, we can do a much less expensive model. It has attendant consequences,
Okay.
both in the classroom as well as across the community. But, there's always that piece of there are certain fixed costs, but then there are things we think are fixed costs. They sort of are and aren't, at the same time.
Right. The program is required, but what that program looks like has some flexibility to it. And then others don't have any flexibility, to them. So this is sounding to me like it's kind of a layered process where you add one layer onto the other. So you start here with identifying, what your priorities are, what you'd like to see, and then move into the spreadsheet of looking at what the costs are. So you're really kind of fleshing it out a little bit there, I guess, right? Identifying some high-level costs, and then looking at what's flexible and what isn't. Where do you have some flexibility to make decisions in it? And then that would work towards a more finished process in the budget. Is that right? Or is there another step in there that you can see that would be helpful?
I think this is a discussion in terms of adding on to the current process. These would be earlier steps that we don't have currently to add on top to what we have currently. So then, later in the spring, we get more details and then you know, in June.
I just think it helps us to justify and to quantify why we're making decisions.
Right.
Yeah, so this,
And so I like this, and we could review it again next year and see what worked and see how it works.
yeah,
What
totally.
we need to add.
And it also is really helpful to understand what we're already doing and what the costs are there. And that's also what I remember, is that we started asking a lot of questions of what is this program and how does it work and who is it helping and
And we did get, into the administration and budgeting personnel did get us more detailed this year about the they had a wish list. And then that was super helpful, but that was really late into the process. And it might have been late because of the legislature, but it did this somewhat, but not where we were able to
Okay.
say, here's the board's priorities. Larry, be able to put your priorities there too, and
Okay.
now go with this.
So you would, in addition to
But I
that,
did like that.
so that was the administrator priorities, is that right?
Yes.
And then meshing those together. looking
Yeah,
at
not
how
that
those
they
match up.
didn't think about board
Okay.
priorities, because there was a piece in it that I particularly remember where we talked about wanting to put money towards reducing the achievement gap, especially for the Hispanic population, and there was ESL personnel that Larry and
For the natural leaders.
yes, the natural leaders. So yes, that was done, and I think that was a step forward.
Okay,
But I don't think it completely gets at this, but it was a great added process.
Okay.
It overlaps this a little bit.
Right.
Makes sense?
right.
But it's kind of along that lines, Larry, that kind of same thing that we got later in the process, being able for us all to do that earlier.
Okay. Well, and if I were in your shoes, what would be helpful to me is to, after having done this whole process, by everyone identifying their priorities and then looking at what the costs are, what's flexible and what isn't, is that when the next budget comes back to you, ensuring that there's a discussion about, okay, how does this budget meet the priorities that all of us identified? And I'm not sure exactly what that would look like. Sometimes it's just looking at the priorities and then lining them up with what you have in the budget.
I like
Which-
that.
And Lydia did that, she had a category.
Okay.
And I
Okay.
asked her to, because she had the spreadsheet, to sort it by categories, and I added up, okay, this is how
So
much.
did it match our board goals, or was it just on our performance?
It was more performance and kind of the informal gleaning that had been done. But it was, just to see struggling learners as a category.
Yeah,
management
yes,
was
I remember
there.
that.
And then the fixed, the surface water costs we're gonna do. I mean, that's obviously something we need to know about, but it was helpful to break it down by category.
And just
for
keep
sure.
working to align it more and more and more.
Yeah. But it was a great tool already.
And the cost was broken down. But what we could add to that is how many students does this affect? I think we added parts, what population does this affect?
Right.
In some of it.
Okay. So Larry, from your standpoint, where you're looking at trying to meet these budgeting needs, is this doable for you? It sounds like it was partially done this year, maybe, where you're looking at sorting it into categories and helping the board understand where, not only the board, but other administrators too, helping them understand how the budget lines up with
Yeah, the
priorities.
categories were reflective of the last prioritization exercise that the board did. Which
Okay.
didn't include some of the board members.
Okay.
But those were the categories.
Oh,
And they
okay.
just
Good.
are a way of saying this part of the organization or this part of our services, these part of our services are being impacted by these additional expenditures.
Okay,
Um,
so it is doable then. It sounds like you've done it already. So it's just adding that extra step of making sure you go back and have, probably each year.
Do the
it's
dot
done.
exercise.
Do the dot exercise to identify priorities each year.
Sticky dot exercise.
Because things change from year to year, quite a bit. So, and I know your district is changing and growing, and so that would be an important piece. What else is there anything missing here? I'll write these down in a way that you can read them.
Are we all of 62? Because I don't think we've dealt with all of 62.
Okay, so,
We have it.
yeah, so if we go back and look specifically, I'm gonna read it again. Regularly evaluate and adjust resources and strategies. So you'll see this little guy is still here, so which we need to move to a new page. But this is really what we've looked at here. Let's see.
Some of these are strategies though, in the sense of, I guess, strategizing the budget.
Right.
Right.
Sure.
And that's one strategy.
Well, I mean, that's a big area of the board. If you look at how the board impacts the district, you know, one area is strategy, one area is budgeting. Those are, and then, you know, really the third prong is policy. Those are the big three. That's how you do it.
But the strategy of doing the sticky dot, and that's a strategy.
It is.
Too.
I'm talking about resources, yeah.
Yeah, strategy to identify priorities, match them with resources. So let me read the rest of this. Adjust resources and strategies for closing achievement gaps to maximize their effectiveness. So what part of this do you feel is is missing still? Probably a discussion about strategy next, maybe.
Yeah, kind of what you said earlier, what's the board's role
Okay,
in this?
okay.
Yeah.
So do you all feel like we've identified fully the board's role with budgeting and a process that might be more helpful to you?
Yeah.
Okay,
So
so
we can start.
we won't beat on this one anymore. Okay, how about strategy? What strategies would you look at in order to evaluate and adjust to close the achievement gap?
I just think we have to have a way to know, and we've talked about this, we have to have a way to know what's working and what's not.
Okay.
And some of it is very difficult to quantify, or even to qualify in a qualitative way, you know, and maybe we need to engage in more qualitative types of research for some of those areas, or qualitative strategies for some of those areas that are harder to quantify, or at least we can get themes of whether they're working, and we might not get hard data. So I remember some of the things like that we were doing that Heather showed us, and the ESL, I can't remember what her name is. Yeah, showed us when we had asked, can you show us ways that we're effectively working to reduce the achievement and opportunity gap. Those were some of the ways that some of the things that we're implementing. It's hard to know, is that really money well spent and time well spent?
Well, and you know, and this is why I haven't quite did, because, you know, I'm thinking about what Larry put in about achievement gap. That's, you know, on the district side, but on the board side, you know, besides going to a Walter presentation, what can we do to look at new strategies?
So I've been chewing on this, not kind of a lot, I've been chewing on this over the last couple of weeks. And so a couple of just some background, so you know where I'm coming from on this one. I read a book, one of the books I read over the summer was on the history of teaching in the United States. And it was kind of an aha moment for me. The teachers have been leading the way on, hey, there's an achievement gap or an opportunity gap since the beginning of public education in the United States. There's always been a gap for kids in poverty, and there always have been groups that have struggled in our education system more than others. And they've always, teachers have always kind of been on the forefront of, there is a gap and these kids are struggling more than others. So I was kind of thinking in sort of that conversation we had a couple of weeks ago, how do we as a board engage in that conversation and ask those questions without being like, oh, we've just discovered there's an achievement gap and why aren't you doing something about it? Because it's sort of just respectful of, okay, for 150 years you have been trying to come up with solutions. So that's kind of one thought. And then the conversation I just had of, we are always continuously trying to balance of how do we educate over 20,000 students as efficiently as possible and maintaining our belief that every child is special, right? And even when we subdivide them into categories, even within the kids that are free reduced lunch or kids that are Hispanic, every child is special, and what may work for one kid isn't going to work for another. And so how do we also be cognizant in our conversation of, we recognize that we're not going to come up with one strategy, even if it's just for reduced lunch population, it's going to fix it for all kids. So how do we as a board have that conversation of what is our work, sort of recognizing that we want to keep that, we want to be able to say each child is special and that we don't expect that whatever we can come up with is going to be one size fits all. So I know, and we talked earlier about some book reading and then strategizing at WAS to, and we're not talking about it yet, but that